All right, we are live.
All right, everyone, we are back from lunch. Apologies for the late start. There was a lot of activity during the noon hour. So we're picking up work on page 67, an act relating to legislative operations and government accountability. And we are going to open up with Catherine Benham, our chief fiscal officer from JFO. Welcome back, Catherine.
Thank you. I am Catherine Benham with the Joint Fiscal Office, and it's nice to be here. And I haven't actually testified in this room since I've been in the room. I really love it. So it's good space. Do you want me to just start talking? Does that make sense?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Sure. I have read your version draft number 2.2, and I appreciate the interest in accountability and trying to improve it on all fronts. And I would say I find the mechanism in this to be challenging. And I'm going to suggest maybe doing a pilot project of government accountability. And the reason I'm thinking about that is some of you may or may not know, but we have a consultant at the Joint Fiscal Office who works on information technology projects. And that started off, I don't know, 10 years ago, maybe longer ago than that, where we were given authority to hire a consultant or hire an employee on a limited service basis for 2 years to start analyzing IT projects and to provide information to the legislature as they were deciding whether to fund projects. And what we did was we ended up hiring a consultant, and that guy, Dan Smith, was great. And we started him with a small project. We started with the judiciary IT project, and we used it as a model for how we were going to analyze projects. He developed a report. He thought about how he would analyze IT projects generally, and we used that as sort of the test case to get it going. And we still use very much that format. You all probably haven't looked at it, but there's one page for every time we do this. These blue arrows, there's 8 questions, and that consultant ranks them on like, does this have a good team lead? Is it technologically make sense? Is it good? Is there a reason for it? And it's the same 8 questions for every time they review a project. And it's been extremely useful to have that template in place. And so what I am thinking, and you're not alone. I know the Senate's also thinking about accountability. But what I'm going to suggest is we do something more along those lines where we start smaller and start with one study and really try to figure out what the format's going to be, how to work it through, think a little bit about how this person might help committees also during the session. It's a lot of work to do these studies, and I'll give you an example. The pre-K study that we did this past fall, winter, into February took 4 to 5 people, many. It was a big project. It was a big undertaking. And so the studies in the current draft are pretty big and monumental. And I would just suggest we start small and see how it goes. And I would also suggest that to keep things simple, because I work for the Joint Fiscal Committee, I would suggest using the Joint Fiscal Committee. They've got the appropriations chairs on there who are clearly thinking about accountability, and that is a good tie-in for them as well. I actually have not talked to the House appropriations chair about this, but so I don't know where she lands on it, but that is in my thinking is it's useful to have those people at the table when you're thinking about all of this, at least to kick it off and to get it started. It could grow. So I'm going to walk you back through our IT model where we hired this person. He did it for 2 years. We came back to the General Assembly. They gave us some money for 2 more years. But we did it in piecemeal to see if we liked it. And then at some point everybody's like, we like this. We just want to keep it going. And so we have it now as part of our budget. And that's just what we have done. But we went through at least 2 biennium. I'd have to go back and look of just having a sort of 2-year trial period on it. And I might recommend it worked well in that case. And I think it could work well here as we try to figure out what makes sense. I know you all have been talking a lot about accountability and you have lots of ideas. I would also suggest, I appreciate the idea of trying to get ideas from other committees, and I don't know that they have had the same conversations. They may not have the same definition of accountability. And that may be why if we do a test run with one case and then we have this person around, they might, and during the next session, come into committees and help them understand how to think about accountability, I would also really like to pick something that is a win, like in terms of like, we can do a report on it. It's manageable. It's not too big, not too small. And also is something that everybody agrees would be a useful thing to know more about. I would just say, for example, the pre-K report that I was just talking about, that is, it's got a lot of information. You all may not read every page of it, but it is a useful document to have. And I don't think, I think everybody appreciated having that done. And I would like in the end for the same thing to result, especially from the very first one. So it's a success and that people can see how it's useful. I don't know what that topic would be. And personally, I would want to run some ideas by people, you know, in leadership, people who are thinking about this, to find a topic that works. And I think you all have been to the all-member briefings. And so that's what happens with the afternoon topics. I don't know if you remember, the afternoon topics are different every December. And that discussion is trying to figure out what is a topic that matters in the moment, that we can cover in 1 to 2 hours, that will provide important information for you all to come back. And so I would want to sort of do the same process with figuring out the topic for the first report, in terms of like getting buy-in from a lot of people, having some success, having an ability to really, it takes some time to figure out that first report and figure out your structure and figure out how you're going to measure accountability and what terms you want to use, and what is it, how you envision it moving forward in different scenarios. So that is my proposal. That would, the current draft as you have it would actually be, you don't have the appropriations in here, but it would be a big lift, and I would be asking for a fair amount of money in either consultants or people. What I'm thinking about for this pilot is more one person, whether it's a consultant or a limited service, but for 2 years. And I would say $150,000, including benefits, is what a person cost when you add in all the employee with retirement and state employee, and the kind of, I think you're thinking of somebody who's not, somebody with some experience.
Yeah.
150. You could, I mean, you know, yeah, state government's not a super high paying place, but I'd be, that's a different discussion. So I would ask for, like, that's what I'm envisioning, is something similar to what we did in that particular case. And you have flexibility to have a consultant or employee, because different people want different things in their lives. I was a consultant in IT because he'd retired and that's how he wanted to do it. And as it turned out, it was not a 40-hour a week job, but there were weeks where it was a lot of time. So it worked out well for all of us. And we have moved to another consultant, who's Lisa Gobbin, who is also doing that work now as a consultant. So I think that we would advertise and think about how, see who comes in and think about different ways to structure it depending on who comes in and who has a skill set and what the work is that we want to do. Trying to think of what else I should say. I don't know. Is there anything else you were thinking about, Representative Waters Evans, that?
I think that as we've been going through this for, what is it, 4 years now, for all eternity that we've been talking about this, I think that it's important to myself and Rep. Boyne and Rep. Garfana that we're all, and I think to everyone at large, that we're getting to a place where it's not, we don't want to create a burden for anyone who would be working on it, for JFO or Ledge Council or anybody else who would be helping us with this. I did speak to, and we'll have to probably have someone from JFC in here to testify if we're going to charge them with this, but I've had some informal conversations about it, and it seems like they're supportive. And it's just important that we are finding a good place for everybody to land where you feel comfortable. And it seems like this, if we were to implement sort of the things you suggested, like JFC being the Government Accountability Committee, at least for the pilot, making sure that the way the project is chosen is neither a free-for-all for everybody to get their ideas, but also not focusing in on one out of like political malice or personal whatever, but just finding something that's manageable I've noticed that when we talk about that thing, we keep doing this with our hands. It's like, it's not a beach ball and it's not a softball. It's like a little volleyball, maybe like a good volleyball sized thing to work on. And that if you can get some extra support for that, it would really be, it seems like we'd be heading in a direction that was comfortable for you. I just want to make sure that that's clear. And those are the things that we think we can probably work out and get some support for too. We would be probably having to discuss a little more like how we arrive at how that topic is chosen. I like the idea of consulting still with, people from all political parties, people from leadership positions in House, Senate, whatever. And I'm sure once this gets over to the Senate, they will have lots of ideas about it too. But I'm appreciative of you taking so much time to think about it and give us your feedback because it's important.
And you said something that I want to just follow up on. We're nonpartisan and it's really,
Yeah.
it is, I really want to maintain that. And I don't want it to put an employee in my office in a position where it starts to look partisan and just for many reasons. I think it's a reputation and I really, it's, you have to really thread the needle carefully in a lot of places. I also would welcome the opportunity to consult with, I don't know what the right word to consult with the the administration, the executive branch on it, because they have their performance work going on as well. So it seems like it would be, you never know who's going to be in charge in either place at any time. But if setting up in the big structure things, it would be nice to have some consulting, talking with each other. That's what I would do anyway.
Yeah.
Right now, because I know them, but that is how I would envision playing it at. And I would also let you know, the Joint Fiscal Committee is 10 members, 5 from each body. It's the 4 money chairs, and then they're required to have a minority party on. So there are both Republicans and Democrats on. Whoever's in charge, they're always, both parties are represented on the committee. I can, if anybody's interested, I can point you to the statute that talks about how the members get appointed. Because I think you've got to also think about, here we all are right now, and here who's on it, but it will evolve over time. And so the question is, how do you want it to succeed in a future time when there are different faces at the table and still have things moving forward and have the right people thinking about it and working on it.
Yeah. It seems like having people who are already, no pun intended, invested in it's like the financial aspect of it and understanding, having like a base level of knowledge that's pretty high is going to make the work of that committee a lot easier. The last iteration of the GAC, I think it was some people who had lots of skills, but maybe had those particular skills that would be helpful in this case. Rep Morgan isn't here yet, but I was just going to Rep Hango and Pinsnote and Coffin. We were just discussing, I'll paraphrase, correct me if I'm wrong. She was just saying that perhaps we had the JFC, the Joint Fiscal Committee, act as the Government Accountability Committee for a pilot program. I've spoken briefly with someone from the JFC who thinks this is a fine idea and is amenable to working it out with everyone. And choosing a smaller project that would be a good way for JFO for this to move forward in a manageable way with adding either a consultant or a limited service position for the duration of the project. And that's where we are, right? Basically, some other details.
And I would think also your start date was in a year, and I think we just started this summer, fall.
Okay.
We would. I don't see a reason to, if you're using a committee that's already formed, we've got things in place, I would just assume we would start.
June 1st or something.
Yeah, if depending on when the session's over.
That's right, June 1st.
That's fine with me.
Yeah.
2 other things I mentioned also, which is I'm just going to read to you because Bryn did text me, Ledge Council, Bryn Hare, the head of Legislative Council. And I'm just going to share with you her thoughts on it. And so her read is that the substantive support, she read the 2.2 would come from the Joint Fiscal Office to the extent that the Office of Legislative Counsel, if you want their support, it would be administrative and legal, meaning committee services support, recommendations on legislation. the Office of Legislative Counsel does not have the skill set to analyze enacted legislation, current policy issues to measure performance. So they would be available for whatever, I don't know, if somebody wanted to, I suppose, draft language, legislation, or legal issues that would, where they would come in. So I would consult with them if they needed, if there was some legal thing, but I think a lot of this is not a legal discussion. But I wanted to share that. Let me say one other thing, which is for the new members, when I talked about this, we're talking about potentially a person or consultant, and I would say $150,000 per year, which is, I'm going to also, as somebody who also helps staff appropriations, that's a challenge in this. We are not in the same era we've been for the past several years where there's money is much tighter now. It's much more like it used to be. So I'm just going to say they're facing some challenges and lots of demands for money as well, and don't have a lot of resources. So that is a piece of this that would come with that. And that will be a discussion for the House to decide what your priorities are and how you want to allocate funding.
So what I'm hearing though is shifting to a JFC model. It can be implemented faster. Pilot, like a singular focus on one thing that's the entity in a nutshell. Yes, Representative Nago.
Thank you. And I'm guessing because this just came about very recently, this position doesn't live in the budget anywhere.
100% correct. That's why you'll have to, if this were to happen, you'd have to find, the budget would have to find funding for it.
And remind me that dollar amount. I feel like I have.
$150,000 is including benefits.
Okay.
So that would be, I would assume it would be a 2-year, it could be whatever you all want, just to be clear. But in my mind, I was thinking, okay, you try it for 2 years. So it would be $150,000 for 2 years. So each year would be, so a total of $300,000 over those 2 years. Yes, does that make, that makes more sense to you then? Yes. Okay.
That's not what I thought.
Yes, I'm glad I clarified. So they wouldn't need to find the 300,000 in this budget, but they would need to plan for it in the next one.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Catherine? As always, we really appreciate it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Here, gonna stay in here then.
Right. Up next, Nick Kramer. How are you, Nick?
Good. Mr. Chair, is it all right if I bring a friend up, my colleague Katie Buckholz here as well?
Sounds like a fabulous idea.
Right.
It works for you, it works for us.
I will kick us off and then yield the bulk of my time to Katie, who's really the subject matter expert on performance, but we will address that in introduction. So hi, committee, good to see you again. For the record, Nick Kramer, Chief Operating Officer for the Agency of Administration, joined by my colleague.
Katie Buckholz, Director of Performance Improvement in the Agency of Administration.
So if it works for you, Mr. Chair, we'll just launch in unless there's any preliminary questions.
The table is yours, sir.
Okay, great. So I'll speak briefly, I hope, at a high level, reactions to the bill. And then, like I said, kind of turn it over to Katie for maybe a little bit more granular feedback. Really appreciate the opportunity to sit and listen to Catherine's testimony. I think it's sort of an intriguing concept. And generally what I would say is, the executive branch and the administration like fully support the goals of this bill, right? Government accountability is something we're all constantly concerned about and striving towards. And we have a whole chief performance office that does a lot of work in that field, and it's something embedded in the operations of state government. And we can all acknowledge, right, there's always room for improvement, right? Continuous improvement is sort of the space that this office lives and breathes. So very much appreciate that the committee's been spending a lot of time on this. It sounds like over the last couple of years, even it's been an ongoing thing. And I recognize iterations of GAC and various bodies that have attempted to tackle this topic. Some of the themes that I'd hit on are not going to be a surprise or unfamiliar to committee members from the executive branch's perspective, you know, initiatives like this, I think, work best and are most successful when there's really clearly defined roles for what each party is doing, right? So what is the legislature's role in this? What is the role of the executive branch, whether that's the chief performance office? I think in the latest draft, they're sitting as non-voting members informing the work. What's the role of the auditor's office, right? I think you all heard from Tim Ash a couple weeks ago, caught the tail end of that testimony. Obviously, this is an area that has a lot of overlap with the work that the auditor's office does, right? And so for lack of a more refined term, I think like thinking about swim lanes and kind of who's doing what and what the charge is of each entity is really helpful to have that be really granular and really defined so that we avoid like duplicative work certainly or contradictory work. And I want to name, I think, as we've tracked the evolution of this bill, this is a great example, I think, of legislation that has seen a lot of discussion and treatment and shifts over time. And I really appreciate the direction that it's gone and sort of moving towards, it seems like, and not to put words in anybody's mouth, but it seems like the committee's sort of at this point of trying to figure out like, okay, how do we test this theory or how do we put something in place to see what works, right? And I think that was a theme of what Catherine just described is like, all right, how do we utilize existing infrastructure to pursue this really important goal? So to that end, I would say a couple things. We are always sensitive, as you all know, about the many, many, many things everybody does in the executive branch and the legislative branch in terms of their day job, right? And whenever there's a new initiative, there's always the risk of potentially unfunded mandates and extra work. Speaking of like, you know, we engage frequently with the auditor's office, right? And when somebody gets a call from the auditor's office, I think Tim was joking, right? They don't like jump out of their boots. That's no shots fired at them personally. It's just the acknowledgement that like part of the work of faithfully, collaboratively working with any sort of accountability entity to do that work involves quite a bit of time in the parties that are engaged in that, right? So there's you just heard from Catherine talking about a position internal to the legislature. The draft bill contemplates involvement from the chief performance office. That's obviously some time, right, in sitting on committees. But I think there's also the potential for a lot of embedded cost or time or engagement with executive branch member employees writ large, depending on what the investigations are, right? And so I would just, I guess, at a high level, urge the committee to be sensitive to that as you're thinking about how this unfolds. Nothing happens in a vacuum and nothing is free, unfortunately, in this world. So that's one kind of high level thing. I think I touched on kind of clear definition of roles, the constant potential for work. I have one really small administrative kind of operational quibble with the bill as drafted, which is there's a $2,000 appropriation to the Agency of Administration for per diems. I'm almost not exaggerating to say that the staff time collectively that would be involved to process that one-time appropriation over the course of the 4 years of the committee as currently contemplated would be more than $2,000. Like, so it's almost administratively like would be great to have that just land with, if this is going to be sort of staffed with the joint fiscal office and part of their general appropriation, I would just direct the per diem appropriation there. I mean, it's not something we couldn't operationalize. It's just that's such a small amount of money. It would be kind of juice not worth the squeeze. But yeah, I guess I'll leave it there. So Katie's with me today to talk kind of more granularly from the Chief Performance Office's perspective. Like I said, they're kind of our office that does a lot of this work and accountability, but also process improvement and thinking about, you know, are we doing government right? And so they have a lot of expertise to share. I think she's got lots of feedback and we're certainly happy to follow up if there are specific questions on things, but I'll pause. I guess I'll pause if there's any questions for me and otherwise yield to.
Any questions before we move over to Kate?
Thanks. Yeah, we appreciate the legislature's focus on this issue. And I know Justin was disappointed he couldn't be here today. I know he's met with a couple of you, but he shared some notes and thoughts to share. I would definitely echo what was shared earlier around scope and capacity. 6 issues could potentially be a lot. And program evaluation and performance analysis can be incredibly in-depth. So having consultant or limited service support would absolutely be necessary. It's something we learned in our work too, with working with agencies, is when you think your pilot's small enough, go even smaller. Especially when trying new things. We find that over and over again. Helpful to learn where your blast radius is as small as possible. Minor note that Justin had noted, could be helpful to clarify whether the 10 meeting limit is per year or per the life of the committee over 2 years. And whether the committee can prioritize depth over breadth, i.e. focusing on a smaller number of issues, which was shared earlier. So we got. And as Nick mentioned, clarifying the appropriate level of oversight. It can be, when you're getting into program evaluation, it can be really easy to get into the nitty-gritty details of day-to-day operations. But the legislative oversight can be most helpful when it's focused on like legislative intent, use of evidence and policymaking, operating at that little bit higher level, focused on outcomes and results. We find that in our work as well too. We really get bogged down in some of the nitty-gritty, but focusing on outcomes and results is very powerful. In sections 8 and 9, any conversations around accountability, we would love to see focus on the annual outcomes and performance reporting. In the legislation that exists already around the annual outcomes report, we would love to see there be a greater focus on legislative ownership of reviewing the statewide indicators. I think as it's written now, it can be presented to the committee to review. It would be great if that was like a standard expectation, like the committee looks at it as well and, makes requests for new data. The legislative ownership over those indicators could be incredibly valuable. And in the initial purpose of the bill, it mentions looking at how legislation is designed, and if it is designed around designed for like effective monitoring, but it wasn't necessarily stated in the duties of the committee. So this could include reviewing whether results were articulated in statute or performance measures identified in the legislation from the outset. How could we better just define and design our legislation to support the decision making in the future around funding of those initiatives? And I think any conversation around legislative use of data and evidence policymaking too, it's important to think about how the legislature is currently using performance data. Back in the days of RBA, when RBA was very, very prominent, legislators used to receive training around data and performance and how to use it. And I don't believe those efforts have been continued. So it could be interesting to examine the legislature as an institution, like how fluent they are with data and using it for policymaking. Section 10 talks about evaluation tools, and I just wanted to flag that the state has an impact assessment tool that's used as part of the budget process. It could be interesting to that. And it could this is a mechanism to look at program evaluation and make sure that there is front end accountability and impact is thought at the beginning of the legislative process. So just glad that tool does exist. And I think in closing, I think this is a great step towards strengthening government accountability, and appreciate to continue the conversation.
Any questions for our guests on this one?
Thank you. I just wanted to say we've appreciated the work that your office has done and the input we've received. I think it's really been helpful to us to hone in on what we're trying to do and the best way to get there. I appreciate the time that you took. Speaking of efficiency and accountability, it took you time to do this, and it's much appreciated.
We always appreciate the conversation. Certainly happy to continue as the committee workshops new ideas. If there are ways we can provide input or perspective, always here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yeah, obviously we're going to continue work on this because we've got some more suggestions that we're going to, I assume, see transcribed into new language. So we'll have a new. We are all set with you. So that actually caught up on the clock. So next we have the Regional County Governance Study Committee, which, as we've taken testimony on before, y'all know, is setting up a continuation of an existing study committee. The new language that is there was something that was reworked by myself in coordination with Senator Harrison, who is a veteran member of that committee. And so just like a refresher, what we were trying to do was just kind of like hone in on the charges and duties within that. So you'll see a couple of changes in there. One of the other notable changes from the first draft is that we pushed the existence of the committee out an extra year, so it would exist the entirety of the next biennium, in case there was a need for the committee to do continued work after the first delivery of a report. So I think those are the most notable changes. Was there's some like legislative intent put in, as well as the structure of charges and duties. So that's what we're taking a look at. And that is one of the things we have flagged for a possible vote on Friday afternoon. So with that, if everybody's cool with it, we'll take a break for 12 minutes. All right.